On our wedding anniversary, my husband got drunk and held me in his arms, mumbling nonsense. Celine, I've dreamed of marrying you and bringing you home. What woman wouldn't be moved to tears hearing words like that? But I am not Celine. Celine was his dead ex-girlfriend. Chapter 1. After bringing Bruno back from the bar, completely drunk, I still don't know how things ended up like this. He lowered his head, one hand cupping the side of my face, the fingers of his other hand threading into my hair, kissing my lips with force, perhaps because he had held a scalpel for years. A faint layer of calluses covered his fingertips. When they brushed against my cheek, it made me feel slightly ticklish. Unlike his cold personality, his lips were warm, carrying a strong scent of alcohol. Dizzy from the fumes, I felt as if I were slightly drunk too. I tilted my head up and slowly began to respond. We had been married for 3 years. Although Bruno and I lived under the same roof, we led lives that barely intersected. He was always busy with work, often performing several surgeries a day. Most nights, by the time he returned, I was already asleep. This seemed to be our first kiss. The air was thick with intimacy. He buried his face in the hollow of my neck, and at some point his hand moved to my back, undoing the buttons there. My face burned, yet I didn't stop him. Suddenly, something warm and wet seemed to drip onto my neck. Celine, I've dreamed of marrying you and bringing you home. His voice was soft, no longer carrying his usual icy tone, but filled with tenderness and longing. My body stiffened instantly. What woman wouldn't be moved to tears hearing words like that? But I am not Celine. Celine was his dead ex-girlfriend. Chapter 2. I shoved Bruno away abruptly, then frantically pulled my clothes back into place. My fingers clenched tightly. Perhaps my reaction was too intense. The man in front of me slowly sat up and rubbed his temples, as if trying to ease the lingering drunkenness. Even at a moment like this, he still gave off an air of cold detachment. Through the hazy mist in my eyes, our gazes met. His eyes were dark, calm, without a ripple, no other emotion visible. I don't know whether Bruno hates me or not. Back then, Celine had exhausted herself trying to save my little brother from drowning. She never opened her eyes again, and just a few days later, it would have been their engagement ceremony. Sometimes I think that if I hadn't taken my brother there that day, maybe none of this would have happened. 3 years, I tried my best to steady myself, yet my voice still trembled when I spoke. Do you still think about her? He simply looked at me steadily, then suddenly curled his lips. Aren't you still thinking about him too? I froze. The words I had prepared vanished in an instant. The him Bruno referred to was Marco, Celine's younger brother, my ex-boyfriend. After that accident, Marco could no longer stay with me. Without a word, he boarded a plane to the United States. The time right after the breakup was the darkest period of my life. I took a week off and shut myself inside my apartment. I began suffering from insomnia night after night. The moment my head touched the pillow, overwhelming nightmares would come crashing down. In my dreams, Celine lay on the ground, soaked from head to toe, her face pale, her lips devoid of color. Then the scene would shift. In the emergency room, a doctor, expressionless, told me, "Your brother has been resuscitated, but due to prolonged oxygen deprivation to the brain, he has already entered brain death. The probability of him regaining consciousness is extremely slim." In the endless dark nights, I would wake with a start, sitting upright in bed in panic, staring blankly at the phone number I had long memorized, unable to press the call button. Scenes from my years with Marco replayed in my mind over and over. I was conflicted, struggling, torn, yet I could never let go. In this matter, it seemed that no one was truly at fault, until that day, when Bruno knocked on my door. After entering, he paused slightly at the sight of the mess scattered across the floor. Without saying a word, he sat on the sofa and began to smoke, one cigarette after another. As if there were no end, I leaned against the wall, watching him in silence. He was wearing a white shirt. His refined face was half hidden in the smoke, looking deeper and more somber than usual. For a moment, I couldn't even describe what I was feeling. Bruno and I weren't very familiar with each other. If not for Celine, our lives would never have intersected. But now that Celine, I didn't know why he had come to see me. "Let's get married," Just as I moved my lips to speak, those words suddenly reached my ears. I froze on the spot, almost thinking I had misheard. Yet Bruno repeated it with utmost seriousness. Helen, marry me. The lights in the room were bright, yet I still couldn't clearly see his expression. His eyes seemed as calm as ever. The only thing I could see clearly was my own reflection in them. It was, in truth, an absurd proposal. I should have refused, but before I could react, Bruno suddenly stood up, with long strides. He slowly walked toward me. My heart pounded wildly in rhythm with his steps. I straightened my back, pretending to be composed, afraid he would notice something, but Bruno saw it anyway. He bent down and pulled away the uneven soft blanket, his gaze slowly sweeping over the sleeping pills scattered all over the floor beneath it. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. He fell silent, then picked one up. Between his slender fingers, he gripped the white pill slightly harder. Under the light, his knuckles turned pale. He paused, then suddenly lifted his eyes to look at me, tugging at the corner of his lips. Bruno was not a man who showed much emotion. I had never seen a smile like that on his face. There was mockery in it, something gloomy, and something too complex to describe. If you're not afraid of death, are you afraid of marrying me? At that time, I could no longer utter any words of refusal. The year my parents passed away, my brother was 4, and I had just begun my sophomore year of college. It was almost entirely on my own that I held up the world for myself and my brother, and Marco had been the only ray of light in my dark and colorless life. Yet fate seemed especially fond of playing cruel jokes on me. Just when I thought happiness was within reach, without warning, Celine died indirectly because of me. Marco left without saying goodbye. My brother became a vegetative patient. The endless torment and guilt, the suffocating feeling of being trapped within invisible walls, the helpless oppression and anguish, they nearly crushed me completely. I never expected that just when I was seeking release, Bruno would appear. I looked at the man in front of me. Suddenly, my heart was calm. I had already lost all hope in my own life. Since he wanted to get married, then let's get married. Let's just consider it, helping him. And so, we truly did get married. Later, I found out that Bruno had been in such a hurry to marry simply because he needed someone to fend off his family's pressure to settle down. But why me? Why did it have to be me? I once asked him casually. At the time, Bruno was reading. He didn't even look up. Because you won't fall in love with me. It was said lightly, yet somehow it made my throat and chest tighten painfully. It was only at that moment that I understood how deeply he loved Celine. Our marriage stood across a human life. Toward him, I could feel guilt. I could feel unfamiliarity, but love would never grow. And when the time came, he would be able to walk away unscathed. But he miscalculated. Chapter 3. Marco already has a girlfriend. Bruno's voice pulled my thoughts back to reality. I froze. What did you say? I ran into Marco a few days ago. He's back in the country. There was a girl with him. Bruno paused for 2 seconds, staring into my eyes as if trying to catch something. His voice slow. I saw them picking out wedding rings. My eyes widened slightly, and an indescribable complexity rose in my chest. Marco is getting married? Does hearing this make you sad? There was something strange in Bruno's tone when he said that, but I had no mind to analyze it. I shook my head lightly. No, I knew very clearly that between Marco and me, it was over. There was no possibility left. The next second, Bruno suddenly reached out and gripped my face. His cool fingertips pressed slowly against my cheek. His voice was cold, carrying an inexplicable trace of displeased interrogation. If you're not sad, then why are you crying? I was crying? I raised my hand to touch my face and blinked, realizing that it was indeed damp. If you want to win him back, I can tell Marco that our marriage is fake. We just got what we needed from each other. I abruptly lifted my eyes to look at him. A mist blurred my vision, and even at such close distance, I could hardly see his indifferent face clearly. Yes, getting what we needed. Bruno needed a woman who would never entangle herself emotionally with him, someone to deal with his family's pressure to marry. So he chose me, and at that time, I desperately needed someone to forget Marco. It didn't matter who, so I agreed to his proposal. Of course, that was what he thought. The emotions I had deliberately suppressed surged up again, wave after wave of bitterness flooding my heart. I began to hate myself, knowing full well his feelings for Celine, knowing that in this so-called game that was never truly a game, he had always remained untouched. Why did I still let myself sink into it inevitably? At that moment, I even wanted to recklessly tell him, "I'm crying because of you." But I couldn't say it. Those words lodged in my throat. The moment they left my lips, the fragile balance we had deliberately maintained would shatter, beyond repair. Perhaps because I remained silent for too long, Bruno took it as tacit agreement. His expression turned completely cold. "Let's pretend nothing happened tonight." He dropped those words lightly and stood up, walking out. I watched his back as he left. His steps were steady, without the slightest stagger, completely different from the drunk who had needed my support earlier. Realizing something, my chest tightened even more, so suffocating that breathing became difficult. So, was he pretending to be drunk? Chapter 4. After that night, the already fragile relationship between Bruno and me dropped to freezing point. He stopped coming home altogether, without a single explanation. I had always known that in this marriage, though it existed in name only, Bruno had actually given me a great deal of respect. He always wore his wedding ring. Everyone around him knew that I was his wife. No matter how late he worked, he would always come home. I remember that once, I fell asleep on the sofa. When I woke up, I found a thin gray blanket covering me, carrying a crisp, pleasant scent that lingered at the tip of my nose. My heart stirred slightly. A casual glance revealed Bruno in the kitchen, methodically preparing a late-night snack. Steam clung to his cool brows and eyes, gradually thinning, making his features appear even more refined. Sensing my gaze, he merely lifted his eyes to look at me, without much reaction. But when he came out of the kitchen, he was holding 2 sets of bowls and chopsticks. After the meal, I instinctively began clearing the dishes. Just as I reached for a plate, Bruno stood up, took it from my hand, and said lightly, "You shouldn't touch cold water today." "I'll do it." I parted my lips. The question, "How did you know?" stuck in my throat and never came out. I could only watch him blankly as he cleaned everything up and walked into the kitchen. It seemed that from that moment on, something between Bruno and me had gradually changed. Yet these past few days, I curled up on the sofa, replaying movies on the screen again and again, but the familiar figure never returned. In the end, I couldn't help calling Santiago, who worked in the same department as Bruno and had even been the best man at our wedding. I beat around the bush for a while, but Santiago still understood why I was calling. Bruno has had a packed surgery schedule these days. He's just been staying at the hospital. Sister-in-law, didn't he tell you? My fingers tightened around the phone. I said nothing. Santiago let out an awkward trying to lighten the stiff atmosphere. Sister-in-law, don't overthink it. Maybe he's planning to surprise you. My breathing stalled slightly. A surprise? Yeah, yesterday I went to his office, and I happened to see him holding a jewelry box. There was a necklace inside, probably for you. The pendant was a silver 6-pointed star. It was beautiful. After hanging up, I stood there stunned for a long time. An indescribable emotion spread in my heart, flowing through my burning blood to every corner of my body. Was what Santiago said true? In a daze, the image from that night surfaced in my mind, Bruno deliberately pretending to be drunk, calling out Celine's name to test my reaction, and that gentle, lingering kiss, tinged faintly with the scent of alcohol. Countless guesses spun through my mind. One impossibly unlikely thought broke through the soil. Could it be that he likes me, even just a little? That speculation tore open cracks in my heart, and beams of hopeful light leapt through the fissures. I didn't dare confirm it, yet I didn't want to deny it either. On Friday, after finishing up matters at the studio, I called a taxi to go home. Just after fastening my seatbelt, my phone buzzed. It was a message from an unfamiliar number. "Helen, I'm back. I'd like to meet you." I stared at the message for a long time before locking my screen. The car moved steadily forward. I gazed absent-mindedly out the window. The night wind carried a chill. Neon lights flickered through the glass, casting shifting shadows inside the car. In the alternating glow and darkness, I seemed to see Bruno's cool face. Only then did I realize that after just a week apart, I already missed him a little. A sudden impulse surged within me. I wanted to speak to him openly and honestly. The urge was so strong that I immediately told the driver to turn around and head to Bruno's hospital. Soon, we arrived. After getting out of the car, I asked the duty nurse at the office on the right side of the entrance which floor Bruno's office was on, then walked toward the staircase. With each step, my heartbeat quickened. I took a deep breath, my fingertips trembling as I pressed the elevator button. Just as the elevator doors were about to close, a warm and familiar voice called out from outside. Sorry, wait. A tall, upright figure stepped into view. Chapter 5. When I saw Marco again, I froze for a moment. The elevator was brightly lit, the light falling on him and making his suit look strikingly sharp. Shadows traced along the side of his face, the lines smooth and sharply defined. Compared to 3 years ago, he looked far more mature and composed. Marco's expression showed slight surprise as well. Clearly he hadn't expected to run into me here. He moved his lips as if about to say something, but in the quiet elevator, a ringtone suddenly rang out. He took his phone from his pocket. After answering, he frowned briefly, then spoke in a very gentle voice. I'm already in the elevator. Don't be scared. I'll be there soon. I stared motionlessly at the rising numbers on the elevator display. The person on the other end of the call must have been his fiancé. From the corner of my eye, I saw him still listening. He nodded lightly in response, perhaps realizing she couldn't see him. He added softly, "The baby in your belly will be fine." My fingertips curled slightly. The baby? So they were getting married because of the child? I withdrew my gaze just as the elevator reached the 5th floor. I quickly stepped forward to leave, but suddenly my wrist was grabbed. The warmth of his touch was clear, yet it stirred no ripple in my heart anymore. I frowned and turned back, looking at him calmly. Is there something you need? Marco stared at me with a complicated look. His Adam's apple bobbed. After a long moment, 2 words finally escaped his lips. Nothing. After finding Bruno's office, I was about to knock when I realized the door was only slightly ajar. Pushing it open, a faint scent of disinfectant drifted in the air. The familiar smell made me pause briefly. There was no one inside. Bruno must have stepped out. I decided to sit and wait. His office was impeccably tidy. Everything on the desk was neatly stacked, except for a half-open drawer below, as if he had left in a hurry and forgotten to close it. At a glance, I saw the black velvet jewelry box in the middle. Santiago's words flashed through my mind. My heart pounded rapidly, and as if guided by some unseen force, I opened the box. Inside was a delicate 6-pointed star pendant set with diamonds. The design was smooth and bright, the platinum chain cool and distinct to the touch. I had seen this brand in fashion magazines before. It seemed to be a collection designed especially for couples. Helen? A low voice suddenly sounded by my ear. I looked up and met Bruno's eyes. He stood beneath the lights in his white coat, tall and upright, his aura distant, blended with the depth of the night. His already dark eyes appeared even deeper, perhaps even softened slightly. Was he happy to see me here? My heart skipped a beat, and the corners of my lips lifted uncontrollably. I didn't notice the necklace slipping from my palm. It wasn't until the crisp clink on the floor stopped that I reacted, quickly crouching down to pick it up. In my fluster, I noticed that on the back of the pendant, there seemed to be a tiny engraved letter. My hand froze abruptly. My heartbeat froze. Every finger felt as if it had been soaked in icy winter water, stripped of warmth and instinct. The letter was C. Celine. He had never forgotten her. It felt as though my heart was gripped tightly in a sudden, merciless squeeze. Countless waves of bitterness crashed down, swallowing me whole. What was I even hoping for? This marriage had been destined from the start. I was the one who let my heart move on its own. I was the one who broke the rules of the game. We were never truly husband and wife. What right did I have to ask Bruno to give the same kind of feelings? Perhaps I had been wrong from the very beginning. I forced myself to rein in my emotions, placed the necklace back into the box, and returned it to the drawer. At the same time, I made a decision. What did you come to see me for? Bruno broke the silence first, his tone slow and unexpectedly gentle. I slowly lifted my head. When our eyes met, I heard my own calm voice. Let's get a divorce. Bruno froze for a few seconds. His jawline tightened sharply, a cold edge seeping into his features. After a long pause, he spoke. You came here just to tell me this? That's right. I looked at him and forced a careless smile. At that time, your mother was seriously ill. You had no choice but to marry me. Now that she's recovered, there's no need for us to keep compromising anymore. The face beneath Bruno's short black hair grew darker. You think you've been compromising? I frowned. I didn't understand what he meant. I've never thought I was compromising. I clenched my fingers and continued. If you hadn't shown up back then, I might have already. I'm very grateful to you. It's just that now. I'm a little tired. Tired? Bruno repeated the word coldly, as if thinking of something. His gaze turned icy. Slowly, clearly, he asked, "Did Marco come looking for you?" Chapter 6. The undisguised displeasure in his voice made me lose focus for a brief moment. I suppressed the turmoil in my heart and chose my words carefully. We did run into each other just now, but it's not what you think. Helen, Bruno suddenly cut me off. These 3 years, you've never truly treated me as your husband, have you? He stared straight at me. Gloom and a hint of hostility quietly stained his usually cold features. Every minute, every second you spent with me, you were hoping he would come back so you could rekindle things with him, weren't you? I looked at him blankly, countless thoughts swirling in my mind, too tangled to sort out. All I could do was watch as Bruno stepped closer and closer, until our breaths intertwined. You should know that you and him can't be together. Bruno leaned down, one arm braced against the desk beside my waist, the other hand gripping my chin. His warm breath brushed against my face, and not just because of his fiancée. The intimacy of the posture made me tilt my head slightly. My heart felt as though it was about to burst out of my chest. I could barely breathe. And also, because of Celine, the moment his words fell, the taut string in my mind snapped. All the expectations from before, all the tender fantasies, dissolved into nothing in an instant. Bruno's words woke me up. Whether it was Marco or him, whether it was 3 years ago or now, because of that accident, there would always be an uncrossable line between me and them. No matter how hard I tried, I could never step over it. I bit down hard on my lower lip. My fingers dug into my palm, using pain to keep myself rational, refusing to cry in front of him like last time. I'll move out tomorrow. Let's find time this week to register the divorce. After saying that, my chest felt even more suffocated. A dull ache spread through my entire body. I didn't know where the strength came from, but I shoved him away. Just as I stood up, a long arm wrapped around my waist from behind and pulled me back. I don't agree to the divorce. Bruno's gaze locked onto me. His voice was clear and cold, his tone leaving no room for doubt. Helen, I won't agree to the divorce. This time, I could no longer hold back the tears. They rolled down heavily from the corners of my eyes. I lowered my head and cried silently. After a long while, I seemed to hear a sigh. A hand gently pressed against the back of my head, lifting my face. His fingertips slowly wiped away my tears. I looked at him foolishly. He was very close. His eyes were like a bottomless whirlpool, and his expression was gentle. As my heart raced, an overwhelming exhaustion nearly swallowed me whole. My voice came out hoarse, almost like a whisper. You clearly don't like me. Then why are you treating me like this? If you don't like me, why do you keep doing things that make me misunderstand? Bruno froze slightly. The emotions in his eyes visibly shifted and churned. His lips moved as if he was about to say something, but the door suddenly swung open. Bruno, Santiago's anxious voice came through. Guess what good news I have to tell? His words cut off abruptly. Carry on. The next second, the door slammed shut with a bang. I quietly withdrew my gaze and turned my head, only to meet Bruno's deep, pitch-black eyes. Santiago really did bring good news. In fact, it was unbelievably good news. My brother had woken up. I filled a thermos with hot water and stood at the ward door, my whole body tense. Even my fingers were so stiff they could only hang straight at my sides. The news was too sudden, too unexpected, too overwhelming. I was so at a loss that my first instinct was actually to avoid it. After studying my breathing several times, I lifted my foot to go in when I heard Bruno's slightly stiff voice from inside. I'm your brother-in-law. For some subtle, inexplicable reason, my steps paused at the door. Inside the ward, confusion was written all over my brother's pale face. His memory was still stuck 3 years ago. But Marco is my brother-in-law. He licked his lips and said slowly, You're Marco's brother-in-law. Bruno seemed to choke on his words. After a moment of silence, he looked at my brother and said, word by word, I am now your sister's legal husband. My brother scratched his head, thinking. He blinked. Will you still be in the future? Bruno's face froze completely. There was suddenly an emergency surgery at the hospital, and Bruno was called away. Before leaving, he turned to look at me. His refined brows were slightly furrowed, and there was a faint trace of confusion in his eyes. The light stretched his shadow long. Though the lighting was warm-toned, it inexplicably carried a hint of loneliness. After Bruno left, I used a warm towel to carefully wipe my brother's face and hands. My brother obediently lifted his chin, his voice soft. Sis, is he really my brother-in-law? I hummed softly. Then, remembering something, I added, not in the future. My brother blinked and motioned for me to come closer. I raised a brow and leaned toward him, and he whispered, then do you like him? My body stiffened slightly. After a pause, I continued wiping his face with the towel, my voice light. I won't like him anymore. The warmth made his cheeks flush faintly, a hint of red spreading down his neck. He gave a small "oh" and muttered, then he's really pitiful. I couldn't help but laugh. What's pitiful about that? My brother protested. You don't like him, and Celine didn't like him either. He suddenly covered his mouth, his eyelashes fluttering rapidly, as if that could hide the secret he had just let slip. My eyes widened slightly as I stared at him. My brother swallowed guiltily, turned his head away, and avoided my probing gaze. Chapter 7. No matter how much I pressed him, my brother refused to say another word. He insisted it was a secret between him and Celine. By the way, he still doesn't know that Celine died saving him. I thought about it for a long time and decided I would tell him only after his condition had stabilized. Come to think of it, it's strange. When I was in a coma, it felt like there was an old lady who came to see me often. She never spoke, she just kept crying. Sis, do you know who that grandma was? My brother asked curiously. Even though I knew he was trying to change the subject, I still froze. It felt as if my heart had been grabbed without warning. The bitterness rushed straight to my nose and eyes. The grandma he was talking about was probably Celine's mother. The next day, I bought some fruit and nutritional supplements and took a taxi to Celine's house. As usual, I handed the things to their neighbor and asked them to pass them along to Celine's mother. I didn't expect to turn around and see two figures, Celine's mother and an unfamiliar young woman. The woman wasn't particularly beautiful, but she had a certain elegance. Her skin was fair. Her long hair fell straight to her waist. When my gaze moved downward, I noticed the slight curve of her lower abdomen. She was holding Celine's mother's arm intimately, her voice soft and coquettish. Mom, when Marco comes back later, I want him to make me pork rib soup. Celine's mother looked at her with eyes full of affection and replied gently, all right. I leaned against the wall and watched the scene. Back then, because of my family background, Celine's mother had always opposed my relationship with Marco. She had never once shown me such warmth. At that time, I had heard from Celine that her mother liked children. I asked Celine to arrange a meal with her and brought my little brother along. Later, her mother changed her mind at the last minute and made us wait in the restaurant for 3 hours. Celine felt apologetic, so she took my brother to a nearby park. And then that accident happened. I lifted my head slightly and wiped my tears away. My vision gradually cleared, and when I turned around, I met a pair of calm, emotionless eyes. My heart skipped. Before I could react, Celine's mother calmly looked away, as if I were just a stranger. After a long moment, I blinked away the sting in my eyes and prepared to leave. From the corner of my eye, I noticed the neighbor's little girl coming out of the house holding a pair of scissors. Suddenly, she slipped, losing control and falling toward Marco's fiancé. Neither of them noticed. My pupils shrank, my mind raced. Almost instinctively, I reached out and grabbed her arm. Be careful. In that instant, the sharp blade sliced across my arm, carving a long gash. Bright red blood slowly seeped out. It all happened too suddenly. Only when I was kneeling on the ground, clutching my arm, did Celine's mother react first. She called my name urgently. I looked into her worried eyes and felt momentarily dazed. Marco's fiancé was frightened and went home to rest. It was Celine's mother who took me to the hospital. The cut wasn't deep, but it was long. I needed 7 or 8 stitches. I have always been afraid of needles. When the needle pierced my skin, I bit down hard on my lip, my shoulder blades trembling uncontrollably. By the time it was over, my forehead was covered in fine beads of sweat. "Thank you for earlier," Celine's mother said, handing me a glass of water. Her gaze was extremely complicated. I remained silent for a moment before meeting her eyes calmly. At that moment, no matter who it was, I would have saved them. Celine's mother stared at me blankly, as if recalling something. Moisture slowly gathered in her eyes. After a long while, I heard her voice. Yes, at that moment, no matter who it was, she would have saved them. I had no intention of telling Bruno about my injury. Even if what my brother said was true, if Celine hadn't liked him, so what? Bruno didn't love me. From beginning to end, there had only ever been Celine in his heart. The doctor reminded me of a few precautions, told me to come back on time for dressing changes, and then said I could leave. On my way out, I was distracted and nearly bumped into someone. When I looked up, I met Marco's eyes. "Let's talk," Marco said, his steady gaze resting gently on me. I lowered my head slightly and didn't refuse. We walked to the lawn outside the hospital and found a place to sit. After a long silence, Marco spoke first, his tone sincere. "I heard about what happened today from my mom. I'm really grateful to you." I gave a soft mem. The air fell into silence again. After a pause, Marco asked, 3 years ago, I left without saying goodbye and left you to face everything alone. Did you hate me for that?" I looked ahead at the vibrant green grass, tapping my fingers lightly against the bench instead of answering directly. "It's all in the past. I didn't even know whether I hated him or not. If I had been him back then, I probably wouldn't have found a better way to handle it either." Marco watched me for a moment, then curved his lips into a gentle smile, his voice light. "Fortunately, we both moved on. We've each found someone to walk through life with." My fingers stilled. Bruno's face flashed through my mind in an instant. Unfortunately, it had only ever been my one-sided wish. I blinked, trying to ease the sudden sour heaviness in my chest with a soft breath. But it didn't help. "Actually, I came back 2 years ago to look for you," Marco said calmly. I froze and looked at him. Marco lowered his eyes as if it didn't matter, but a trace of regret slipped into his voice. "By then, you were already married to Brother Bruno. I went to see you, but you refused to meet me. You even asked Brother Bruno to tell me that you were very happy and that I shouldn't disturb you." My eyelids trembled uncontrollably as I stared at him in confusion. When had that happened? Marco tugged at the corner of his mouth with a faint, helpless smile. "At the time, I hated him for taking you away, and I also thought he had wronged my sister. We almost got into a fight. If my mom hadn't later found my sister's diary and learned that there was actually nothing between him and my sister, I probably wouldn't have given up so easily. After that, I flew back to the US, and that's where I met my current fiancé." I frowned. The more I listened, the more something felt off. I was just about to ask for clarification when Marco asked with concern, "By the way, how's the baby in your belly?" I stared at him blankly. "The baby?" Seeing my genuine confusion, Marco frowned as well. His dark eyes studied my face. "Last night around midnight, Brother Bruno suddenly messaged me. He said you'd been diagnosed as 4 weeks pregnant. He also said you didn't want to see me, that seeing me would affect your mood, and asked me not to look for you these days. Unless," Marco paused, looking at me thoughtfully, "you're not pregnant?" Chapter 8. I had only just spoken a single word when a voice, extremely cold, came from behind. "Helen." I was startled and instinctively stood up. Then a long, slender hand wrapped around my waist and, with a slight pull, drew me entirely into his arms. That familiar, crisp scent enveloped me. My back stiffened instantly. I lifted my head and met his gaze. Bruno was staring at my arm. His expression was dark, his eyes growing deeper and darker by the second. I saw the undisguised worry in them. "I heard it by accident. Just a few stitches. It's nothing serious," I explained instinctively. "The doctor who stitched me up said the wound isn't deep. It'll heal soon." "It's true." My tone softened unconsciously. Bruno's thin lips remained tightly pressed together. "Bruno." Marco walked over, The corner of his lips slightly curved, though something obscure flickered in his eyes. As a doctor, misdiagnosing your own wife's pregnancy, isn't that a bit unprofessional? Bruno's body stiffened slightly. He shot me a quick glance, then looked at Marco with indifference. If you have time to worry about that, you'd better go comfort your frightened fiancé. I froze. So Bruno already knew. At those words, the faint smile on Marco's face gradually disappeared. After a moment of silence, his gaze turned complicated. After a long pause, he sighed. I just want to tell you, you don't have to be so hostile toward me. Bruno let out a quiet, cold scoff. Marco met his gaze calmly. This time, when I came back to see Helen, it was only to clear things up and put the past to rest. Bruno's brows knit slightly. His arm tightened subtly around my waist. I've never thought about getting back together with her. Bruno cast him a cold glance, clearly unconvinced. Marco finally looked helpless. Word by word, firmly, he said, I can see it clearly. The person she loves now is you. Bruno froze. Chapter 9. Bruno didn't have any surgeries today. He took leave early and drove me home. Throughout the drive, I clearly sensed that something between us had shifted into something subtly different. There were too many questions I wanted to ask him, yet I didn't know where to begin. He seemed to have something to say as well, but he never spoke, so we stayed silent the entire way, each lost in our own thoughts. Silent in the elevator, silent as we unlocked the door. Just when I thought that if I didn't speak, Bruno would continue pretending everything was fine, he suddenly grabbed my uninjured arm and pulled me toward the sofa. Before I had time to react, I was firmly trapped between his chest and the couch, and his kiss fell hard against my lips, almost plundering, at times intense, at times slow and deliberate. This kiss was the same as the last one, and yet different. His breath was cool and persistent, slowly invading my space like an airtight net, wrapping around me layer by layer, as if determined to consume me completely. 2 buttons of my shirt were undone. My skin trembled faintly beneath his slightly cool fingertips. His kisses trailed lower. After an unknown stretch of time, he buried his face in the hollow of my neck, breathing lightly, and let out a muffled laugh. Helen, so you love me. A rush of heat shot to my head. My entire face burned. I hadn't expected that Bruno liked me too. One thing after another. Everything he had done made his feelings unmistakably obvious. Suddenly remembering something, I lifted my face and asked. Marco said there was nothing between you and Celine. Then what about your engagement? Bruno paused, then slowly said. At the time, the person Celine liked ran away from their wedding for her and even cut ties with their family. She had no choice but to ask me to pretend to be her fiancé. Something didn't add up. If Celine liked that person, then why? Bruno was silent for a moment before speaking softly. The person Celine liked was a girl. My heart trembled. You know her too. She used to tutor your brother. No wonder my brother knew about Celine and that girl. I felt dazed. A beautiful girl in a white dress, with a small black mole on the side of her nose, suddenly surfaced in my mind. I remembered. That girl once told me she had come to the city to find someone, and during that time, every time I invited Celine over for dinner, she always found excuses to refuse. Now everything finally made sense. We had agreed that once that girl left, we would cancel the engagement. Celine and I grew up together. I couldn't refuse to help her. Couldn't refuse. I looked at him thoughtfully and bit my lip. Then, did you ever like Celine? Bruno's refined brows curved slightly. Are you jealous? But before I could answer, he looked straight into my eyes and said, no. At such close distance, I could clearly see the sincerity and openness in his gaze. I couldn't help but believe him. Suddenly, I narrowed my eyes slightly. But that night, you called me Celine. Bruno's expression stiffened faintly. He turned his face slightly away. For 3 years, I thought you were still thinking about Marco. I wanted to know if I had any place in your heart. So it was just a test? He hummed softly, a hint of awkwardness flashing through his eyes. Marco had just returned to the country. I was afraid you'd really rekindle things with him. I guess I panicked. He leaned closer, brushing his forehead lightly against mine before pulling back. His voice was hoarse, tinged with apology. I'm sorry, that was my fault. You must have been very hurt then. I studied his eyes for a moment and smiled. Fine, I'll forgive you for that. I never imagined that someone as cool and self-controlled as Bruno could feel that insecure. But I still had one more question. When did you start liking me? Bruno thought for a moment. At first. Maybe it was just to deal with my family's pressure to marry. I raised a brow. He lowered his gaze to me, lips curving slightly. His deep voice softened. But later, I realized I didn't know when it started. I got used to setting out 2 sets of bowls and chopsticks after cooking. Got used to carrying someone sleeping on the sofa back to the bedroom. Got used to picking out champagne roses she likes when passing a flower shop. I even ordered a custom necklace for someone a month before our anniversary, planning to surprise her. While I was still stunned, he somehow produced the 6-pointed star pendant. His cool fingertips brushed against my warm neck. I shivered slightly. He fastened the clasp and released his hand. He looked at me for a long moment, voice slightly hoarse. It looks beautiful. My face warmed. My fingers instinctively touched the pendant. My heart pounded so fiercely it felt like it might explode. It was an H. For Helen. For me. But I lowered my eyes slightly, biting my lip at the side. If it had been someone else, if it wasn't me, would you have gotten used to it too? Would you have gotten used to cooking for her, buying her flowers, carrying her back to the bedroom? My voice grew softer. Just imagining that possibility made my blood feel as if it had frozen. A chill and ache spreading through me. The air fell silent for a few seconds. I've thought about that too. Bruno met my gaze, his eyes deep, as if trying to see straight into my heart. And only then did I realize, if it hadn't been you from the start, I wouldn't have gotten married. My breathing faltered before I could respond. And he continued. My mother isn't some stubborn traditionalist. The so-called pressure was just a few casual reminders. And she's kind. She would never force me to do something I don't want just because she wants grandchildren. Haven't you two gotten along well these past 3 years? I nodded instinctively. He wasn't wrong. His mother had always treated me well. In 3 years, she had never once urged us to have children. Don't you understand yet? Bruno looked at me, lips slightly curved. From the very beginning, you were my ideal type. I gazed into his eyes, feeling as if my heart were being wrapped and tightened by invisible threads. Unable to speak, until his kiss fell again. His lips pressed against mine, his fingertips tracing along my waist. His voice was low and husky. Your arm is injured. We need to be careful later. Vaguely, I heard him murmur. Not here. Before I could react, I was lifted into his arms. Instinctively, I wrapped my arms around his neck and exclaimed, Where are you taking me? He raised a brow slightly, his voice smiling. Unhurried. Carrying someone back to the bedroom.